Welcome, folks. Welcome, everyone, to Thriving in the Age of AI and Ask Me Anything session with the one and only Scott Galloway. With that, let's get started. Scott, to begin with, first of all, welcome. Second of all, let's define an important term, thriving. You've written extensively on the topics of happiness and wealth. Are those the same as thriving? What does thriving mean in your book?
It's good to see everyone. Thanks, Maxwell. I think of thriving as just kind of the next step beyond survival, and that is you're more than surviving. You're creating surplus value for others. You're healthy. You're mentally fit. You're enjoying what you're doing, or you have purpose, serving and contributing to society. Feel as if you are adding more value than you're taking. I don't know. I hate this question actually. The thriving, I don't know. Like doing well. I
I'll
don't know.
say happy and
Watching
wealthy, maybe.
Netflix, a lot of edibles. I don't know. Thriving.
Learning AI, learning how to use it without losing authenticity and standing out in a sea of sameness. How do we do that? How do we use AI successfully and stand out as individuals still?
The CEO of Section, Greg Shove, had, I thought, a really interesting suggestion, and that was to have a second screen. You have your computer screen and then have a second screen where all the AI LLMs are up, whether it's Anthropic or Midjourney or ChatGPT, and use your second screen to try and see how AI can help and get really good at it. So as it relates to AI, it's the first thing you have to do is just get comfortable. I initially thought I just finished a book, and when I started writing it, I thought, oh, great, I'll just give it a really long, great prompt and it'll write the book for me and I'll put my name on it and make a lot of money. And that's not how it works. AI so far, when you read it, it feels very anodyne, very sterile. The worst insult I can give my team when I get something from them and I don't like it, I write back and this feels like AI wrote it, which to me is an insult. And so I think AI is a great for input, great for data. I use it to find facts, but I don't use it to create a narrative arc, or I find it's kind of void of soul. It sounds like what it is, and that is a machine wrote it. So I use it as input, as a resource, the same way I use Google or try and leverage Google as a resource. But I think at the end of the day, you have to add your own kind of sexiness, your own spice. The AI is the chip, you're the salsa. You have to come up with an idea, you have to have a different frame. You also need to be careful. You need to ask, a lot of times I ask AI something and it's just plain wrong. And I have to say, is this right? And then I'll say, oh, sorry, I was wrong. It's like, well, why were you wrong? But anyway, but well above my pay grade. So first off, recognizing AI as a tool, it's not the, it's a quiver in your, or an arrow in your quiver, but you still have to pull the cord back and aim and come up with an interesting view on things. The broader question is AI is just one tool. I think there's a lot of catastrophizing around AI. I mean, employment is at record levels still or near historic highs. I think it's going to create more jobs than it destroys. So I'm not an AI catastrophist. I'm actually an AI optimist. Every technology in history has followed a similar arc, and that is in the short run, it destroys some jobs. We thought automation was going to decimate the automobile industry from an employment standpoint, but we didn't envision heated seats or car stereos, and we ended up with additional margin, additional ideas. I don't see any reason why AI wouldn't create more jobs than it destroys in the medium and the long term. Then there's the fact or the notion of the fear that it's going to become sentient. And then I don't think I've never seen any evidence of that. I'm not a philosopher, but I don't see that. Um, and then there's the notion that it creates misinformation. I think that's already happening. I think there's so many AI-driven bots out there. It just creates misinformation at scale. Um, I think the biggest threat, and we'll talk more about this, of AI is loneliness, but thriving in a I think there are bigger issues around thriving as a young professional than figuring out how to use AI. One, if you're just an economic animal, as I was when I was younger, um, get to a city as quickly as possible, deploy your human capital against the greatest platform, and that's typically a city. Two-thirds of all economic growth is going to happen in one of 20 super cities. I still think certification, credentialing matters if you have those skills and that discipline and those opportunities and natural resources, which is a fancy way of saying college or graduate education. Investing in trying to be as social as possible. I think that's sort of the secret weapon for young people. If Google puts out a job opening, they get 200 CVs within like 30 minutes and they shut it down. Of the 20 people they bring in, 70% of the time, the person that gets the job had an internal evangelist. So the key when you're young is to establish a set of relationships such that you're put into a room full of opportunities without being in the room. So you want to be the person that when someone finds out there's a job opening, they think, oh, Lisa would be great for this. So I think some of the things that are enemies for young people, for your home, I think your home is for 9 hours a day, and that the amount of time you spend off a screen and out establishing relationships is correlated to your success. Establishing as many relationships as possible early on. This is a bit of a diversion, but I read a newsletter. This week's topic is porn. And I think that porn is a real success killer for young men because it decreases their mojo or their hunger to get out and meet people and quite frankly have sex. And I think a lot of young men's um, mojo is being zapped by deep-pocketed companies that want to convince them that they can have a reasonable facsimile of life on a screen with an algorithm. Why go through the hassle of getting out and making friends in real life when you have Reddit and Discord? Why go through the hassle of getting a job in person? I think remote work is a fucking disaster for young people. You absolutely want to get into the office. That's where you're going to find mentors, friends, and mates. And then why go through the hassle and the rejection of getting in shape, showering, having manners, demonstrating kindness, being persistent, and enduring rejection when you have view porn? And I worry that we're maturing or evolving an asocial, asexual species of young men that ultimately end up obese and depressed and don't establish the skills they need to maintain friendships and romantic relationships. And a lot of those skills serve you well in other environments the rest of your life. So, how do you thrive? The key is relationships and risk taking and developing resilience. And that is getting out there, approaching people, pitching people on ideas. I've never been qualified to do anything I've ever done. I've never gotten a job that I deserved. I've never dated anyone that was in my weight class. I've always had really good luck because I'm really comfortable with rejection. So the key for a young person, in my view, is to get out of the house and get used to the term no. Because the more no's you get, that means that you're getting to really good yeses. And I saw just the most staggering, rattling, upsetting stat this last week. Obviously, look at this a lot through the lens of young men. And that is 51% of men 18 to 24 have never asked a woman out in person. And I just think I just think that's tragic. I just think that's so depressing and upsetting because your success is a function of your willingness to endure, in my opinion, rejection and develop resilience. So how do you thrive? You take risks, you get out of your house, you try and always punch above your weight class professionally, economically, romantically, and get used to the term no and find out that the next day you're fine, they're fine. And if you're not getting a lot of no's, it means you're not reaching high enough. So long-winded way of saying, all right, how do you thrive? You get to a city where you play against the best people in the world. You don't spend a lot of time at home. You get into the office and you express interest in friendship. You express interest in learning about money and trying to make money and approaching people for jobs. You express romantic interest while making the other person feel safe. And you get comfortable with no. Show me success. Success is a direct function of the amount of rejection that you have absorbed and endured.
AI is a powerful tool. Could it weaken students' ability to think, write, and analyze critically? So as young people navigate this world and rejection and all those things that you just mentioned, Scott, how do we make sure they're safe from this particular pitfall?
I'm actually an optimist around education, and that is, I think AI should be able to figure out a way for teachers to go, how much of this paper was written by AI? And at some point, I imagine they're going to say, if the whole thing was written by AI, you fail. If you use it as inputs, that's fine. And I think I mean, at one point when I started business school, they didn't want us using spell check. They thought that was cheating. And then they figured, okay, that's just stupid. Use spell check. So I think incorporating AI into their toolkit is a good idea, but forcing them to think creatively and differently. I don't think AI is the biggest threat or challenge facing educators K through 12. I think the biggest threat is that we essentially are creating these little dopa monsters, that they're on their phone so much and they're so used to on-demand dopa that they don't have the ability to be bored or sit still. And the educators I talk to, K through 12, say they're just dealing with a group of kids that if they don't turn every class into a visual stimulation circus, there's emotional outbursts. There's kids that are struggling with attention, that have outsized reactions to things, that can become depressed, sullen, violent. And I worry that just as kids' brains are getting hardwired through puberty, we're training that brain to have a constant action reaction with their phones. So I don't think AI is the threat facing teachers. I think it's the constant overstimulation. I mean, I can't tell you how much time I spent as a child just being bored. We called it, now they call it mindfulness and working on your sleep or what other bullshit millennials are coming up with. I was just bored all the time. And it was really good for me because it forced me to think creatively. It forced me to be a little bit more introspective. I think it taught me how to be bored. A lot of work is boring. And so I could excel in environments similar to people in my generation that maybe were a little bit boring. And I worry that the young people just aren't developing those skills, that they're constantly, I see with my kids have very low attention spans. We set up a thing where every weekend I get to pick a movie, and I pick all these movies from the 80s that I absolutely love. And one of those movies was Breaking Away that I just loved. And my kids got about 10 minutes into it and they just couldn't handle the boredom. They just weren't willing for the payoff. And so it's just all this. It's just we're raising a generation of low attention dopa monsters. AI is just a tool. I think good teachers are going to incorporate it into the learning.
Scott, you've mastered the art of storytelling, the gift of gab. As a digital agency founder, I'm considering AI tools like HeyGen to create a digital twin of myself and improve my own gift of gab. What is your take on that? Is that just a crutch? Is that a useful enhancement?
Yeah, the most successful digital twins will be of people who are already really, the AI replicas or copycats are of great artists. So, using AI to enhance your storytelling or create charts or turn your podcast, translate it into Korean easily such that the story has more distribution. But um, it's passe, but I make my life as a storyteller. And if there's anything I could pass on to my kids, it would be storytelling. And that is the ability to create a narrative, capture people's attention, ground it in lessons, parables, humor, and try and get people to feel something. I think that's the key to storytelling. So I would try and absolutely, my recommendation for anyone is sure, use AI as a tool to enhance your storytelling, but that's about you getting in front of a bunch of people, whether it's on paper, on Substack or Medium, or deciding that you're going to get really good at TikTok or that you know how to tell stories via PowerPoint, or your storytelling is a function of your domain expertise and your charts and your data sets. But one of the things I challenge the kids, when I say the kids, my students, is I say, pick a medium, find out what do you need to be in the top 1% in LinkedIn or on Instagram or on TikTok. And then by the end of the semester, I need you to be in the top 1%. And the way you get in the top 1% on any of those mediums is by becoming a great storyteller and learning that medium. But it's like anything else. It's about 49 or 51% genetic. I'm never going to be a fantastic basketball player. And then the rest of it is practice. I have an incredible advantage. For the last 22 years, have sat in front of 4,500 people for an hour and a half twice a week and tried to capture their attention and give them their $7,000 worth, which is what the tuition we charge them to take my class. And I do a ton of speaking, a ton of writing, but there's no getting around it. I wrote a book by Stephen King that kind of changed, two books that sort of changed my life were Stephen King on writing. I think to write well is the sort of the training wheels, or if you want to be in sports, you've got to be strong. You got to be in the weight room. And the weight room for me was writing. I make more money speaking than I do writing. I'm probably a better I'm probably better at podcasting than writing, but for me, it all starts with writing. If you can write well, I think it's hard to be a great storyteller without the ability to write at least competently. And if you can write well, you're probably going to be a pretty decent storyteller. So if you have aspirations to be a great storyteller, Strunk White's Elements of Style, which is the most boring, important book you'll ever read. And then I read Stephen King's On Writing. I thought that was a fascinating kind of instruction, user's manual on how to write. But for me with storytelling, it's practice. And for me, it starts with the written word. It's super hard and it's super rewarding. And I aspire to be a great writer. I'm a great speaker. I think I'm a great podcaster. I'm a good writer. I aspire to be a great writer because then I think I'll hit that real level of great storytelling.
Paul's asking, if you assume the short-term AI projections are overblown and the long-term implications are understated, how would you describe AI opportunities, especially agentic AI opportunities, for new businesses over the next 12 months? What should new businesses focus on?
Okay, so let me go very meta. I
Mhm.
think there are certain technologies where the general assumption is that any technological or tectonic shift in a technology or an introduction of a new technology is going to create several dozen companies worth 100 billion and two or three companies worth trillions. I'm now of the mind that there's going to be an enormous destruction of value around the most valuable AI companies right now. And that is, if you think about jet manufacturing and jet engine transportation technology, that arguably is one of the greatest breakthroughs in technology in history. My parents crawled along the Atlantic Ocean for 9 days getting seasick to get to America. Now, just a couple of generations later, you can get from London to New York in 7 hours for $400 if you reserve a ticket in advance. It's just extraordinary, the unlock, the global unlock in terms of the fluidity of commerce, the ability to apply human capital to its greatest return. I can skirt along the surface of the atmosphere at 8/10 the speed of sound. In the last 9 days, I've been in Barcelona, London, Austin, Miami, and New York. And next week, I'm going to do 5 or 6 more cities. And it's just extraordinary, the unlock. Airlines, if you add up all of the revenues of Boeing and Airbus, and you take out government subsidies, and you add up all the net losses and profits of all airlines, it's probably at this point just broken even. It's been just a shitty business to invest in or work in. At the same time, the public and people in society have registered extraordinary stakeholder value. Look at the personal computer. We basically put a computer on everyone's desk by 1995 that in 1975 would have cost $10 million. Imagine your life without PCs right now. Unbelievable shift in technology, unbelievable unlock. In 2006, I raised $70 million and I bought 10% of Gateway Computer, which I realize is the weakest flex in the world, and went on the board. We were the second largest PC manufacturer in the world. We made 3 times as many computers as Apple, 8 points of gross margin, not 26. And we ended up selling it for, I think, 900 million to Acer. And there really hasn't been a computer manufacturer that's been able to capture a lot of value. Google or Meta will lose $900 million in the next 10 trading minutes in the market. So there are industries, there are technologies where they're unable to sequester the gains to a small number of shareholders. And I now believe after DeepSeek that AI might be one of those technologies. And that is AI won't let any one AI platform get too far out ahead of it. And because of an inability to develop defensible IP, because of an inability to develop proprietary channels of distribution, I think you're going to see, I think that this is one of those technologies where the big winners are going to be society, not necessarily a small number of companies. Now, having said that, if I were young and an economic animal and trying to leverage AI and start a business, I would try and find something at the intersection of the most disruptible business in the world and AI, and that is US healthcare. I think just trying to get people's data or data sets to help people manage their kids' diabetes or manage their chemotherapy treatments and basically take the friction and some of the human costs out. I test everything on my body. I'm at that age where I'm obsessed with living longer because it's the only thing I can't buy with money right now. And so I'm become obsessed with my health. So I'm constantly peeing into a jar, having blood taken, scooping up little bits of my fecal matter and sending them to some German lab for reports. And I take all of that data and I upload it into AI. And then it tells me, stop drinking so much, you fucking idiot. But in addition, it gives me a bunch of other stuff. And I think that if you combine that with a front end lifestyle kind of coach around diet, around working out, around lifestyle modifications, around understanding your health. Do you have a predisposition to prostate cancer? How does that change your diet? What types of exercise? Okay, your kid has diabetes. A mother, and it's always the mother, spends 5 months of her year managing that child's diabetes. How do we streamline the prescription, the referral, the insurance claim process? There's just going to be a ton of little, very profitable companies in the healthcare space that leverage AI. And generally speaking, my litmus test for a company that's going to do well is how boring does it sound? So the routinization of back office things like compliance, um, prescriptions, reimbursements, the more boring it sounds, probably the more lucrative it is. But healthcare is a $3 trillion business where only 1 in 5 consumers in the US healthcare are satisfied. It is deeply, deeply broken. We pay $13,000 per consumer for lower life expectancy, higher infant mortality, more obesity. So you could describe US healthcare like San Francisco real estate. It's expensive but bad. And it strikes me that AI could really take small niches in healthcare and take out a lot of the friction. And there'll be a lot of really interesting startups. But circling back to my original point, I now believe that AI is not going to create a bunch of multi-trillion-dollar companies as we're hoping. I think the big winners here, and I feel really good about this, is similar to jet transportation or PC technology. The big winners are going to be society.
Are we at risk of all brands being in the sea of sameness with Gen AI getting infused in all of our marketing and business strategy, branding strategy? What are your thoughts, Scott?
It's an interesting thought. Will there be a sea of sameness where everything gets reverse engineered? I don't think so. I think I'm watching this show, Adolescence, and it really moved me. And I thought, okay, in an era of AI and so much content, quality storytelling still really breaks through. And, when people say, I consistently find people on social media, and I think this person is so brave and so authentic, I think there's still huge opportunities to break through. So, what I do think is that a lot of the creative industry is going to be disrupted. I think, what was it called? Flowers of the Leo DiCaprio, artistic, peak artistic masturbation, $250 million so they can all collect Academy Awards and nobody watches it. I think you're going to see a ton of AI enabled content at a much lower cost. So it's just an arbitrage. It's just a technology that's going to produce a ton of content for a lower cost. But I don't see a sea of sameness. I still think breakthrough creative, great storytelling, still that Nike ad at the Olympics was, or I'm sorry, at the Super Bowl was still great storytelling. Stuff still breaks through. So things can be reverse engineered faster, but I don't see a sea of sameness, or maybe I'm missing something.
What's the smartest way to get all my departments to start utilizing AI without it turning into a costly distraction or a hobby? And Alex runs a manufacturing company, which I think adds an interesting layer to this conversation. So maybe we can zoom out and talk about deployment of any tool, really, but in the context of AI, I think it's a bit more interesting in today's day and age.
I don't think it's any different than training, upskilling people for any other thing. And that is, all right, we have somebody who's smart internally. I think that finding good people internally and asking them to put on kind of, learning lunches, hiring smart vendors, hiring right technology. And also, I ask, I I constantly challenge my team. I'm like, why are we not putting our podcast out in Korean and Portuguese? Why, our graphs, why is it taking so long to turn around this podcast? Well, it's because they're creative in the charts. Well, could AI decrease the lead time? What I'm constantly saying, I'm that old guy that doesn't understand how hard this stuff is, saying, well, can't we use AI for that? But I think that's a question you should be asking a lot. What can we use? And then assign task forces and, just create, reward people for productivity and people who leverage AI and make it. All these companies have training, like they train their people around. Unfortunately, training has become a dirty word because it's mostly been around shit like compliance and DEI and ethics and having a growth mindset and all this stuff where everyone's like, okay, I'm going to pretend that I enjoyed this and I got something out of it, and they just see it as a tax on their time. So I would make it probably voluntary, But I think people in management are probably figuring out that AI is not going to take my job. Someone who understands AI is going to take my job. And I better be one of those people that understands it. So I would imagine workforces, if you put on a good program that says, using AI in manufacturing, a 12-week workshop, hourly, your manager will free you up. It's free to you. Um, I would imagine you'll get pretty good uptick or uptake on that.
At L2, you argued that top companies thrive near world-class engineering schools, near colleges. In the AI era, how have these geographic dynamics shifted in your view, if they have? I'll stop there. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
In question, does AI level the playing field geographically? I don't know if it does. So the premise the person is, I used to say, I had a thesis that you can't start, there's no company worth over $100 billion that isn't within a bike ride of a world-class engineering university. I was advising some leadership in Florida on economic growth, and I said, until we have a world-class engineering university, Florida is always going to be for tax pats and old people. And if you really wanted to sustain Florida's economy, you would, other than the geographic arbitrage of sunshine and low taxes, you would find somebody who would endow an enormous, well-funded engineering university at the University of Florida or somewhere else. And whether it's Spotify or Facebook or BlackBerry, they're usually all the same thing. A couple of really ambitious or Dell students who are in graduate school or in the engineering program or technology program start a company, and then they find other talented people from that department, and then they make a punch for money, and then they decide to stay there because they like it or they fall in love or they want to hang out in Austin, and they start an ecosystem. So I don't know. Will AI be able to create? I don't think so. I still think that world-class technology and education is still going to attract so much great human capital that understands how to put a layer of innovation on top of AI tools to create interesting startups. So I don't know if it's all of a sudden going to disperse or distribute opportunities. It's an interesting question and thought. Um, but I don't see anything. I would still tell people to get to a major city and and to invest near a world-class engineering university.
What about the global divide? Will developing countries catch up faster thanks to AI, or will the gap growing even wider as the access to AI might still be pretty expensive or limited in some countries? So different scale, same question, kind of.
I'm a glass half empty kind of guy. I think income inequality is only going to get worse because within each of those nations will be a small number of people who are super talented. So my parents are from Scotland. I love Scotland. And the one thing that the smartest, brightest people in Scotland have in common is they all left. And I feel like the world is becoming the same place where if you're a kid in, um, you know, Uruguay, you might decide, I understand AI. I'm blessed with the ability to get a good education. So I'm going to get to Sao Paulo. And if I'm really good, I'm going to get to San Francisco, um, or London. So I think that the the city centers that have the greatest density of risk capital. I mean, one of the reasons the US is so far outpaced Europe, and I think that's reversing right now. But over the last 40 years, is that for every startup in the US, there's 5 million in venture capital. For every startup in Europe, there's 1 million. And I think in Latin America, it's like $250,000. So just that risk capital. But I don't see these economies all of a sudden leveling up because they have access to AI. What I see is that the best and brightest will leverage AI and then use that as their ticket to get out to a place. If you're good in New York, you're going to make X. If you're amazing in New Caledonia, Canada, or New Zealand, you're going to make 0.2x. You'd rather be mediocre in New York, San Francisco, or London than amazing in St. Louis or San Lucia. And I don't see that changing. I still see the draw of city centers and the density of professional and personal opportunities still sucking the best human capital. from all of these areas. There'll be knockoffs. The whole world, I think, will become more productive. I think there'll be more growth, but I don't think it's going to be a leveling of the playing field. I think we're always coming up with reasons why technology and the economy will naturally heal the middle class. I think the middle class is an accident that's a function. The greatest innovation in history is not the microchip or the iPhone, it's the American middle class. And that was effectively 7 million men coming home from war who demonstrated heroism. They were fit, they were attractive. We gave them money through the GI Bill, the National Highway Infrastructure Act, and they had a ton of kids. And we decided for the next 30 or 40 years to constantly redistribute income into the middle class. At one point, corporate tax rates were 90%. The highest tax rate on individuals was around 70%. And then we keep talking about the fact that wanting to believe, especially the far right, that the middle class and these nations will naturally heal themselves, that it's a naturally occurring part of the economic ecosystem. Unless you massively redistribute income from the most fortunate and the most profitable people and companies, respectively, income inequality is the natural state of things. It's happened throughout history. Other than 1945 to kind of 2005 in Western markets that decided to massively redistribute income into the middle class, you've had just massive income inequality. We've had great equalization over the last 60 years because of a recognition that the middle class required feeding. There's now a myth that's been fomented by the incumbents and the richest and corporations that the middle class will heal itself. That's total bullshit. And we're moving back to sort of the law of the jungle, where a small number of people have all of the opportunities, not only financially, but I talk a lot about young men, but romantically. 80% of women in history have reproduced, only 40% of men, because the majority of men, if not given opportunities to have on-ramps into the middle class, become totally untenable and unviable economically and emotionally, and never have the opportunity to reproduce. So what do we do with all of that testosterone? We invent wars and conflicts. And that's where I think we're headed back. I think we're headed back to this very scary place of haves and have-nots. And this is a political statement, but I think it's true. I think America is basically deciding that it's no longer a place for constitutional rights and opportunities for everybody, but basically an operating system to take as much opportunity and rights from the lower 99 and cram as much as possible into the top 1. And I think generally speaking, that's what's happening globally, where the fastest growing demographic is not Latins or seniors, it's billionaires. We've gotten from 500 to 2,500. No other demographic group has quintupled because we've been fooled into believing that the middle class is a naturally occurring. We're not providing foreign aid. We're not investing in countries believing that if we lift them up, that'll be good for global prosperity. We've now decided in America that we're going to slowly but surely cut services such that we can cut taxes on the wealthy. As a percentage of GDP, corporate taxes haven't been this low since 1939. The top 6 Americans, wealthiest Americans, are worth more than the bottom 50. The 25 wealthiest Americans pay an average rate of a tax rate of 6%. In my 30s and 40s, when I was your age, Maxwell, I was paying 30 to 40% tax rate. I've gotten exceptionally lucky. I make a lot more money. In my 50s, I'm now paying a tax rate of 17%. So we have consciously made a decision or been fooled into this notion that all of these technologies and the global economy will restore the middle class and level up people. What a bunch of bullshit. We have decided that the top 1% is essentially protected by the law, but not bound by it, and the bottom 99 are bound by the law, but not protected by it. And we are slowly but surely transferring more and more opportunity back to this basic winner-take-all Darwinian law of the jungle, and like to think that AI is going to level everything. No, it's not. It's going to make everything fucking worse. Get your head out of your ass. That's a Republican talking point, that there'll be some leveling up and everything will get better again. No, unless we consciously redistribute income from the most fortunate among us to the middle class, things are going to continue to get worse and worse. Little depressed today. I took a Xanax last night and had a Peroni, and today I'm in sort of a very much a glass half empty kind of mood. But it
Shouldn't
was
have
good while
asked.
it lasted. By the way, Maxwell, you should know on Xanax and Peroni, I'm an outstanding dancer to 80s music. I discovered that last night. Freaked out my dogs, but it was worth it.
Just now discovered it. Moving into the bigger picture discussion, thriving as a society in the age of AI. Christine is a psychotherapist, and she asked, how can we psychotherapists or mental health professionals use AI to help clients while preserving the value of human connection? How do we put people in the center of it all while all these apps are pushing self-service and talk to a bot, things like that?
I think there's a lot of applications for mental health. So trying to upload a patient's I can see an environment where a lot of times your patient really needs you late at night or on trip or is having an episode and can't contact you, and creating almost like a digital twin where the person for very basic things could reach out and saying, I'm having suicidal ideation. And then the bot or your digital twin would say, okay, first off, you need to realize this is in your head right now, and you need to make sure you're around other people right now, and reach out to people who anybody and let them know you're feeling this way, and then say, and then use that person's skill set and that domain expertise to have a preliminary conversation with that person, or give them 80% of your skills for 3% of the cost, right? Because there's just so many people who don't have access to therapy. So I'm working with Google on this program they call Portraits. And my inspiration for doing it was I get so many just gripping emails, mostly from young men, and they're just so clearly struggling. And I don't have I used to get 2 or 3 a day. Now I'm getting 20 or 30 a day. And you read these things and they're so authentic and real and upsetting. But I just don't have the bandwidth to respond to them. So I'm working with Google to develop an agent that can either refer them to resources if it's a serious problem, but B, just offer them advice on when it's a question about, should I go to grad school? That's what I get a lot of. I know exactly how to answer that question and what question to ask them, and then get them to a pretty good answer. And I think that AI might be able to take those conversations I've had. I'm uploading all my books, all my podcasts, everything I've ever written, such that this agent will be able to answer those basic questions. Will it be as good as speaking to me or speaking to a psychiatrist who's skilled? Absolutely not. But maybe it's a way for people who don't have access or don't have the money to a trained psychotherapist, or quite frankly, I'm not going to respond to their email because I get too many. So it's an opportunity just for scale. And I think that a psychiatrist just keeping on top of agents and how you replicate your voice for kind of non-working hours to help people, and exercise, kind of mental health wellness. I think there's huge unlocks around mental health. Having said that, I think it's really important that part of that training is that they only use this, or you know, they break glass in case of emergency, and that we want to be very careful not to train people to start replacing human relationships with digital relationships. I worry that a lot of people are just going to start having relationships. I mean, the movie Her was so prescient. They're just going to start having relationships with bots and with algorithms, and find themselves 5 or 10 years later totally sequestered from real relationships and the effort they take, which is really important, and just wake up kind of depressed. So it's great to, I think, scale human expertise, but I don't think it should ever try and replace human relationships. You know, the searches for AI girlfriends are skyrocketing, and now the searches for AI boyfriends is starting to increase. And I think that's a disaster. I think it's, we make fun of people who just spend all their time with cats, or my neighbor is this asshole. He loves dogs, and I think it's because he hates humans. And my sense is, if you just start spending all this time with an AI bot or agent, I think that's a recipe for disaster, because humans are complicated, and that's what's wonderful about them, is that they occasionally disappoint you and delight you, and they're hard to figure out, and that's what keeps you kind of on your game. And you have to take risks, and you have to get hurt. So anyways, long-winded way of saying, use it to scale yourself, but I hope we don't train people to not pursue human interaction.
So, in the age of AI girlfriend, AI boyfriend searches, I know you have a lot of advice for young men. Marie in the chat is asking, I think, a timely question. What's your advice for young women?
I don't feel as qualified to talk about young women, and whenever I do, I get into trouble. So when I talk to young men and women, I'm really upset that young people aren't connecting. The most the most I think the unifying theory of everything, if I was in charge, so to speak, I think the thing we want to reverse engineer from is the following scenario. And that is, I think every young person should have environments and opportunities to find someone to partner with romantically, and should they choose, have kids. That's been the most rewarding thing in my life, and I think everyone should have that opportunity. So that means, in my opinion, more freshman seats at colleges, more third places, more bars, drink more. The risk to your liver in your 20s when you can process alcohol is dwarfed by the risk of social isolation. Think of all the friendships and potential romantic relationships you had, and then ask yourself, did alcohol play a role? And for 3/4 of it, it played a huge role. So this Huberman Attia-driven non-alcohol or anti-alcohol movement is a disaster for young people. Get out, drink more, make a series of bad decisions that might pay off. More jobs in person. We need to stuff way more money into young people's pockets. $25 an hour minimum wage. It would be $23 an hour if it just kept pace with GDP or inflation. Universal child care so both people can work. 7 million manufactured homes at 30 to 50% of the price of a home right now. Tax holiday for people under the age of 40. So bring down costs, massively bring up salaries, and give young people the opportunities to find each other, fall in love, mate, and should they decide to have children. Now, I'm not saying you have to have kids. You might decide to spend all of that disposable income on brunch in St. Bart's. More power to you. But the most prosperous nation in the world should be able to figure out a way for young people to find love and to have children and not be so fucking stressed out about how they're going to pay for their kids' health care. And then all the incumbents will claim that there's all sorts of other factors at play. There's depression and people aren't connecting with each other, or that it's network effects or globalization. Bullshit. People my generation want to take all your fucking money and your opportunity by racking up debt with your credit card so I can get richer and richer. That is exactly what is going on. If there was anything resembling some sort of equitable tax code or economy, young people would be able to have a home and children. So the unifying theory of everything, in my view, is that we need to create an economy and a society where young people can have the platforms and the venues to fall in love and the economic wherewithal to have children should they choose. And the fact that we are the most prosperous nation in the world and young people are deciding not to have partners or children means we are doing something wrong. And nothing else matters. Really, nothing else matters. Like, what's the point of all of this? AI, GDP, you know, technology, smartphones, none of it matters if you can't establish deep and meaningful relationships with other people and at some point have some semblance or a reasonable facsimile of a family. And the fact that we live in a nation where young people no longer have those opportunities, I mean, just do the math. We have the youngest, most depressed, isolated, obese generation in history. And I think it has something to do with the fact that people aren't finding love, they're not finding companionship, and they're not getting to have kids. So I would like to see just a massive leveling up economically of young people, more income redistribution, a massive build in new housing, national service that brings people from different sexual orientations and ethnicities together to serve in the agency of their country, more bars, more third places, more religious institutions, more nonprofits where people get the opportunity to meet, where quite frankly, men get the opportunity to demonstrate excellence as opposed to whether you're over 6 feet and if you make over $100,000, see above Tinder. There's got to be more opportunities for young people to find each other and more economic opportunity. The average 60-year-old is 72% wealthier than they were 40 years ago. The average 25-year-old is 24% less wealthy. So everyone talks about how entitled young people are. Bullshit. They're entitled to be enraged because my generation, I'm in the club doing rails of ketamine and champagne, and they get to throw their credit card inside, and I run it up, and then when I'm done with the club, they get the bill. That is effectively our economy right now. So I'm very focused on how do we create an economy where young people, quite frankly, the unifying theory of everything for me is how do we create the opportunity for young people to find someone, fall in love, and should they decide to have children? Because everything else is secondary. Everything else is a means to the ends. The ends is deep and meaningful relationships. And I find our economy, we've decided, okay, let's give all of the economic and mating opportunities to a small group of people. And because Americans are optimists, they all believe that they're going to be in that small group. And I can prove to all of you that 99% of your children are not remarkable, that they're not in the top 1%. So I'm very like disheartened when I see economic policies and society supporting this winner take all economy where we're optimizing for the freakishly remarkable or the children of rich kids who will get all the economic, social, political, and romantic opportunities at the uh, at the cost of younger people. If you're in the lower quintile of income earning households, there's a 1 in 4 chance you'll get married. If you're in the top quintile, it's 3 in 4. Marriage has now become a luxury item. I'm not suggesting marriage is the answer for everyone, but everyone should have maybe the opportunity to partner with someone. Anyway, I'm very focused on young people, their economic opportunities and venues such that they can establish deep and meaningful relationships. I think everything else is just a means to the ends.
Jacqueline is actually asking on the topic of kids, do you think there are careers our kids will be working in that don't exist yet? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that before we get into our final question.
Oh, I'm sure there are, but I don't know what they are. I mean, I don't, everyone was talking about that the you can never go wrong taking computer science. I just think it's fucking hilarious that engineers are getting fired. And I know that sounds unfeeling. I run a bunch of small companies, and the engineers and the technologists just came into my office every few days and asked for a raise and showed me the same goddamn chart over and over. It couldn't happen to a nicer group of people, in my view. Um, that was a little harsh, but we all thought, okay, let's have Mandarin in high school and computer science. Oh, that's paid off. Yeah. I mean, history, biology. This is when you replace civics with computer science, you get Mark Zuckerberg. So I think just the basics, biology, communicating, the sciences, math, history, recognizing that, oh, you know what, in the 30s when there was an economic shock, they started rounding up people. And what do you know? We have someone right now who looks like Hitler with a bad spray tan. If there's an economic shock, we might start rounding up people again. And to believe that, oh, it would never happen here, you haven't read history. 80 years ago, we started rounding up Japanese families, despite the fact a lot of their sons were serving in the European theater. It can absolutely happen here again. And I worry that people spend so much time watching cute dance videos, they have absolutely no sense of history. And they don't realize how many echoes from very dark places in Europe's past that America is beginning to sound a lot like. America is starting to sound like a tribute band of really dark moments in history. So I don't know what the best future industries are going to be. I would say a basic understanding of biology, history, the sciences, and understanding how to communicate. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure certain industries will, but I just love that computer scientists and then systems engineers are getting kicked in the nuts over and over. That makes me smile. It's time for tea. Back to you, Maxwell.
My final question to you is one, a good question, and two, it comes from a person named Darwin. So I was like, I have to ask it. So Darwin Frederick is asking, AI can do a lot for us, but we don't want it living our lives for us. How do we make sure people still feel like they have a purpose? How do we make sure that that doesn't go away from our lives, the sense of purpose?
Put down your phone. I mean, my say yes. The gap between someone offering you an opportunity and yes, that time is a killer. Say yes to everything when you're young. Someone asked me for advice for women. Okay. Advice for men dating. I coach a lot of young men. I think I understand young men. So I think my advice is more relevant. My advice to young men regarding dating. I ask a question. Would you want to have sex with you? Or do you have a plan? Are you in shape? Do you take some pride in the way you look and the way you dress? Are you kind? Do you demonstrate kindness? Are you persistent? Are you willing to endure rejection? Can you demonstrate intellect, interests, artisanship? Are you funny? Can you make someone laugh? All of these things are, my advice to a guy is, all right, Start working out, start making a little bit of money. You don't have to be a baller, but have a plan, demonstrate kindness, be persistent, take risks, approach strangers, right? My advice for women is what I call a second coffee, and that is women have a much finer filter. The basis of evolution is that men want to spread their seed to the four corners of the earth, and women have a much finer filter to select the strongest, smartest, and fastest seed. That sounds sexist. It is. I am a sexist. I think there's a difference in the gender, and I have a lot of data to back that up. What I would tell women is in a online dating environment, what I would suggest is if maybe you didn't have a great time or weren't immediately attracted to the person, but consider a second coffee. Because if you talk to couples that have been married longer than 30 years, 75% of them say one was much more interested than the other in the beginning. And it was almost always the man was more interested in the woman. But the man had an opportunity to demonstrate excellence. They worked together. He was really good at what he did. I was at the same temple with him, and I just saw how kind he was to his parents. I got to see, I hung out with him and I found I liked the way he smelled or I liked his hands. Where do men demonstrate excellence for women who instinctively have much higher standards because the downside of sex for women is so much greater? So what I would say, my dating advice to women is the same as men. Say yes to everything, get out, meet as many people as possible, have as many random interactions as possible, have a couple drinks sometimes if you need it to increase your courage, approach strangers, be friendly. And as it relates to dating, even if you didn't have a great time, consider a second coffee. Consider a second coffee because I think there's a lot of people who've been married 30 or 40 years who say in the beginning, I didn't see the excellence. I didn't see it. But the real problem right now is men, and that is men are not keeping pace with women. Women are leveling up economically. Men aren't keeping pace economically, and they're also not adding as much value logistically. 70% of divorce filings are from women. A lot of that is because men are struggling economically. When a man begins making less money than the women, they become twice as likely to divorce, 3 times as likely to use ED drugs. But also, men are not keeping up. If a man is no longer the economic provider, it would be natural for his partner to expect him to pick up slack domestically and logistically. And a lot of times, men's contribution on other dimensions of the relationship does not keep pace with the acceleration of the economic contribution of the woman. So the woman basically does the math and says, boss, what are you bringing to the party? So, essentially 85% of marriages, quite frankly, just aren't working out. 50% are getting divorced. A third are happy. A third are still in it for the kids. So in a third are miserable. So there's dynamics, I think, that both men and women, I'd like to see young men and women, more opportunities around each other. Men, ask yourself, would you want to have sex with you? Get on it. Make yourself more attractive, for God's sakes. There's some basics, right? And then for women, I would never tell a woman to be less choosy. What I would say is perhaps consider a second coffee, even if you're initially not that interested. But the key is be out of your house, say yes, cancel your Netflix subscription, don't take edibles, go out, meet people, say yes to everything, say yes to everything. We're mammals. We're meant to be around other people.
Fantastic, Scott. This was so fun. The chat's exploding. You're perfectly on time. Thank you again for being here with us today. It was great.
Thanks, everybody.